Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to have a good think about using pivot chords in major keys. So first of all, let's just be clear, what is a pivot chord and when might we want to use a pivot chord? So this is all about modulation. In other words, when you want to change from one key to another key. And one thing I constantly hear from composers is that, they're quite happy composing, but they get stuck in a key and they're never too confident about how to move into another key. So the answer is to try and use a pivot chord if you're writing in a sort of conventional style. So what is a pivot chord then? A pivot chord is a chord that's common to two keys. So in other words, it's a chord that belongs to the key you're leaving and also belongs to the key that you're joining. So if you're in C major, for example, and you want to go to G major, you go through all the C major chords and you think which of these chords also appear in G major, because any of those chords could be used as a pivot chord. And the idea is that you'll start your piece of music in C major, you choose your pivot chord, and from that point onwards, you carry on in G major. I like to think of it as a kind of door between two rooms, I'm standing in this room now, and when I want to leave this room and go into the next room, I'll exit using the door. In other words, the door is the connecting space between this room and the next room. I can't just appear in the next room or somehow go through the wall. I have to use that access point. So if you think of a pivot chord like a door, a musical door, an access point between one space and another space, then you'll soon get the idea. Now, when we modulate from one key to another, in the conventional kind of practice of doing this, we normally modulate to what we call neighbouring keys. So that's something we also just need to think about for a moment. So which are the neighbouring keys? Well, up here, I've just put 6 keys from the top of the circle of fifths. So if you know your circle of fifths, this will be a little familiar fragment. So major keys on the outside, minor keys on the inside. So if I'm in the key of C major has 5 neighbouring keys. So one of them is G major. So the difference between C major and G major is G major's got 1 sharp, C major hasn't got any at all. So they're neighbouring keys, the difference between a key with no sharps and a key with 1 sharp. On the other side, I've got F major, which is a key with 1 flat. So that's a neighbouring key because there are no flats in C major. There's 1 flat in F major. And these 3 keys have their relative minor keys. In other words, minor keys that use the same key signature as their relative majors. So C major is related to A minor, because neither of those keys have any sharps or flats in the key signature. We've said G major's got 1 sharp in the key signature, so has E minor. We've said F major's got 1 flat in the key signature, so has D minor. So if I'm in C major and I want to think about where my neighbouring keys are, here they are. These are the 5 neighbouring keys. So let's move on to what I've got over here then. So here we are in C major, which we're going to use as our starting key, and then I've listed each of the neighbouring keys. Okay, and what I've then done is to underline each of the pivot chords. In other words, when we go into F major, well, I can look at chord 1 in F major, that's F, A, C, and that's a pivot chord from C major, because in C major, that's also chord 4. So you see how this works. So if I'm in C major, I've got a scale of C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then I come back to C. I can form my chords by adding a 3rd and a 5th above each note of the scale. And then I get my chords. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So when I talk about this being a pivot chord into F major, you can see in F major, here's the scale of F, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, and then back to F. So my chords in F are, chord number 1 is F, A, C, chord number 2, G, B flat, D, chord number 3 is A, C, E, chord 4, B flat, D, F, chord number 5, C, E, G, chord number 6, D, F, A, chord number 7, E, G, B flat. Now, because F major has B flats in it, any chord that's got a B flat in it is no use to me as a pivot chord. I'll need to use a B flat once I get into F major, so after the pivot chord, I'll be looking to introduce a B flat because that's what's going to confirm the fact that we've moved into F major. But in order to choose a pivot chord, there's no good choosing a chord with B flat in it because in C major there are no chords with B flat in it. So hopefully you're beginning to see why some of these chords work as pivot chords and some of them don't. So think from C major to F major. Let's go back to chord 1 in F major. Well, chord 1 in F major is F, A, C. So that's the same as chord 4 in C major. So number 1 in F major is a pivot chord. Number 2 in F major, G, B flat, D. It's got a B flat in it. So it's no use as a pivot chord. That does not appear anywhere in C major because C major doesn't have a B flat. So that's not a pivot chord when I'm moving from C major to F major. Well, what about chord 3? Well, chord 3 in F major is A, C, E. Well, that's a handy one, isn't it? Because it's also chord 6 in C major. Chord 4, well, that's no good to me because it's B flat, D, F. So no B flat in C major, no good. Chord 5 in F major is C, E, G. That's a good pivot chord, isn't it? Because that's also chord 1 in C major. Chord 6 in F major, D, F, A, is also chord 2 in C major. Chord 7 in F major, E, G, B flat, that's no use to us because again, it's got a B flat in it. So can you see how we know that 1, 3, 5 and 6 are useful pivot chords, but there's no point in trying to modulate from C major to F major using chords 2, 4 or 7 because those 3 chords have B flats in them. Okay, so use the pivot chord, then introduce the B flat to confirm the key of F major. Now we can go through the other closely related keys in just the same way. The same principle applies. So when I look at G major, well, what are my chords in G major? G, B, D, A, C, E, B, D, F sharp. So I'm already thinking that's no good. It's got F sharp in it. Number 4, C, E, G. Number 5, D, F sharp, A. Another one with F sharp in it. Number 6, E, G, B. Number 7, F sharp, A, C. Another one that's going to be no use to us. So can you see on exactly the same principle which the pivot chords are? Number 1 is good because that's also 5 in C. Number 2 is good because that's 6 in C. Number 3 is no good at all. Number 4 is good, that's 1 in C. Number 5 is no good, it's got an F sharp in it. Number 6, that could be useful because it's 3 in C. Number 7 is no good, it's got an F sharp in it. So then we discover if we want to go from C major to G major, our possible pivot chords are 1, 2, 4 and 6, but we can't use 3, 5 or 7 this time. Those are the ones with the F sharps in it. So you see how we do this. If I wanted to go to A minor, the relative minor of C major, well, always work on the basis that we're using the harmonic minor scale to do harmony. That's why it's called the harmonic minor scale. It generates harmony. And I know that there'll be people who want to write modal stuff, but there'll be people who want to use the natural minor. There are pieces of music where you might use the melodic minor, and that opens up other possibilities. So at the moment, I'm sticking with a harmonic minor because, if you like, that's the general default position for music which is using harmony, using chords from 1600 onwards. Not to say that you can't use those other things, of course you can, and that's going to change this a little bit. So in order to avoid confusion, for now I'm sticking with harmonic minor. Okay, now in A minor, well, chord 1 is going to be A, C, E. Well, that's handy, isn't it? Because that's a chord 6 in C major. Chord 2 is B, D, F. Well, that's quite useful. That's a chord 7 in C major. Now, chord 3 is no good to us because in the harmonic minor, remember that even though A minor has no sharps, no flats in the key signature because it's related to C major, nevertheless, in the harmonic minor, we raise the 7th note of the scale. So we're going to get a G sharp in chord 3, which is why it's not going to be a pivot chord to the harmonic minor. 4, however, I'm looking at the wrong things here. 4, however, is useful because that is a chord 2 in C major. 5 is no good because it's got a G sharp in it. 6 is pretty cool because that's also chord 4 in C major. 7 has got a G sharp in it. You see how this goes. When we go to D minor, okay, a little bit further away from C major, but still one of the neighbouring keys. What's interesting in D minor is that only chord 1 is a pivot chord because D, F, A is chord 1 in D minor. It's also 2 in C major, but we've got B flat in the key signature, and if we raise the 7th note we get C sharp as well. So all these other chords, you know, chord 2's got a B flat in it, chord 3's got a C sharp, 4's got a B flat, 5's got a C sharp, 7's got a B flat, so 6 has got a B flat, 7's got a C sharp. You see, they're no good to us because if you've got B flats and C sharps, they're not throwing up chords that could pivot from C major. So there's only one possibility if I'm going from C major to D minor. However, if I want to go from C major to E minor, there are more possibilities. So you see how this works in E minor. So I've got F sharp in the key signature. I'm raising the 7th degree of the scale, so that gives me D sharp. So chord 1 in E minor, E, G, B. Well, that's chord 3 in C. 2's no good, it's got an F sharp in it. 3's no good, it's got a D sharp in it. 4 is cool because that's a 6 in C major. 5 is no good, it's got a D sharp and an F sharp in it. 6 is good because that's 1 in C major. 7 is no good, it's got a D sharp and an F sharp in it. So you begin to see which are the pivot chords and which are not the pivot chords. Now I'm doing this from C major to these neighbouring keys, but if you wanted to start in a different key, which inevitably you'll want to, you can do exactly the same thing. You can work out which are the pivot chords and then decide which one you want to use. And if you know about these technical names, subdominant, dominant, relative minor, supertonic minor, medium minor, well, you could start from any point in any major scale and find these key relationships that are giving you the nearest possible neighbouring keys. You can see the problem about going further afield. If you want to modulate from C major with no sharps, no flats to a key with 6 sharps or 6 flats, you can see the problem because you've got so many sharps, so many flats, you're going to be struggling to find a pivot chord. So you're not going to be able to do that kind of modulation using a pivot chord. There are other ways you can do it, or you might want to travel through other keys on the way to one of those more extreme keys in order to find a pivot chord to take you from this key to that key, then a pivot chord from that key to another key until you get where you want to go. So you might need to stage a series of modulations using a series of pivot chords. But you'll always find pivot chords that are going to take you to closely related keys, to these immediately neighbouring keys. So let me just kind of demonstrate this a little bit so you can sort of see how this might work. So I've got a little musical phrase that I'm going to use in C major, and then we're going to think, well, how could we then use a pivot chord to modulate to one of these other keys? So let's go from C major to F major, and we're going to use chord 1 in F major as the pivot chord. So here's a phrase in C major. Okay, now I'm going to use my pivot chord. So I'm using this chord. It's chord 1 in F major, but it's also 4 in C major. So at the moment, it sounds like 4 in C major. But as soon as I've used that pivot chord, I can introduce a B flat and go to F major. You hear how that's happened? So this is in C major. Here's chord 1 in F major, and then I'm using a B flat and going on in F major. So that's using that as a pivot chord. Okay, what happens if I want to use chord 3 as a pivot chord? Well, chord 3 in F major is A, C, E, which we said was chord 6 in C major. So here's my phrase in C major. Now if I use that pivot chord and then introduce my B flat, I've gone into F major. Okay, what happens if I use chord 5? Well, that's the C, E, G chord, which is 1 in C major. So here's my phrase in C. Let's use that 5 and then introduce a B flat, and there I am in F major. You see how this actually works. And if by using the pivot chord, you get a very smooth transition from one key to the next. It's rather good, isn't it? Okay, let's look at chord 6 in F major. That's D, F, A. So we said that chord 6 is a pivot. It's also chord 2 in C. What happens if I use that as my pivot chord? Sounds good, you see? You don't have any kind of bump, do you, going from one key to another? You hear the key change, especially when you introduce an accidental that takes you to the next key, but it works. If you don't use a pivot chord, sometimes there's a kind of musical wrench as we suddenly think, whoa, we've just arrived in another key. It may be you want to have that kind of musical wrench, which is fine. If you want to have that surprise, then do it without the pivot chord. It will generate a surprise. But if you want it to run smoothly, well, this is the way to do it, using a pivot. Okay, let's move on. So 1 in G major is a G, B, D chord. So if I want to modulate from C major to G major, well, I could use that chord, couldn't I? That's got me there quite happily. 2 in G major is an A, C, E chord, chord 6 in C major. See, it just works beautifully, doesn't it? What about chord 4 in G major? That's C, E, G, same as chord 1 in C major. You see, it works every time. What about chord 6 in G major? That's going to be an E, G, B chord, and that's chord 3 in C major. You get the idea as to how this actually pans out. It's kind of simple, but clever at the same time. Very systematic. Okay, let's try and get to a minor key. What about A minor using chord 1? Well, that's A, C, E, which is in C major is chord 6. So let's see how we get on with going to A minor through that chord 6 in C major, chord 1 in A minor. See how I'm doing that? Well, we could carry on doing this, but hopefully I've done enough to demonstrate how these pivot chords work. Now, I've never really seen it laid out like this before. So some people like to have charts that kind of illustrate exactly all their options. And if you're looking for that, well, there it is. That's how it works, starting in a major key. And as I say, you could move that to any other major key starting point by using the circular fist to identify your neighbouring keys, or by using these key relationships to get there. But that's the principle of a pivot chord, a chord that's common to the key you're leaving and to the key you're joining. Once you've passed through that musical door, introduce the accidentals you need for the new key, and you're away. So if you're composing or improvising, it's really good to know what all of your options for pivot chords are. I find a lot of people just don't quite understand how pivot chords work. And once they do, it's a great liberation. A lot of people can use a pivot chord to get from one key to another, but they always use the same one or two chords. So this might open some new doors. You might think, oh yeah, I often use that chord, but I've never used that chord before. So it should open up some new possibilities for you. So I hope that's really useful in terms of using pivot chords in relation to major keys. And if you look elsewhere on our channel, you'll find us doing exactly the same thing for minor keys. So enjoy using your pivot chords.